Because I like stories. I love any type of stories, whether it be books, whether it be articles, whether it be TV shows, whether it be movies, podcasts, documentaries, musical. I love going to New York and going to Broadway. I love that. And I like even just somebody telling me a story. And Sue and I and the boys, we went to the movies yesterday to see a new movie that came out this weekend, and it has a brand new premise. It's never been done before. It's called The Lion King. And so, you got to the beginning of the movie, right before it starts, and that little screen that comes up, it says, "Please silence your cell phones." Well, everyone in my family picked up their phone and clicked it off. Even Montana pretended. And so we had it off, and about 15 minutes into the movie, I realized that I didn't turn my watch off. And my mother calls me, thanks, Mom, and it goes off, and I'm scrambling to turn it off, and then Dakota's like, "Oh, Dad." And then everybody's eyes in the movie theater, I felt their hatred. You know what that's like. When you go to the movies and somebody's phone goes off, you want to kill them. And I wanted to like hide because I felt their hatred. And when somebody interrupts your story, when you're at home and you're watching a movie or watching a show, you get aggravated. If you know me, I'm kind of quiet. But there are 3 members of my family that are not. I won't mention their names, but they know who they are. And I could be watching a show or I can be watching a movie, and they'll come in and they'll start talking, or they're in the room with me and they'll start talking. And when you get aggravated, when saying you have to pretend to love your family at that moment, you have to stop it, wait for them to get done, or Dakota likes to just stand in front of me as I'm watching something. I'm like, "Move." But you can't just automatically start it back up. You got to go back a little bit and catch your brain up, because now you're so engrossed in the story that you feel like you're a part of it, and so you don't want to miss anything. And so that is what a story does. It sucks you in, and a brilliant author knows how to get you invested in that story to make you feel like you're a part of it. So if the ending doesn't go good in the book that you're reading, you want to throw that book across the room. Or if the movie, you want your money back, but you can't because it's the author's prerogative. Or maybe it goes exactly the way you want it to go, and you feel satisfied at the end of the story. You feel happy because the story begins and ends with the author. The plot, the characters, the intrigue, the twists, the turns, everything comes from the keyboard or the pen of the author. And that, why The Lion King will be the #1 movie this weekend? It's because of the story. They didn't change the story, no spoilers, but they didn't change the story. It came out in 1994, and they just put live action CG animals in there. And see, we all love stories. We all binge watch. If you have Netflix, you binge watch. Netflix has about 118 million family accounts. And in those family accounts, you can have 5 sub-accounts. So you just do the math, how many different accounts are on Netflix. And 61% of those accounts, they binge watch. You watch either 2 to 6 episodes every time you sit down to watch Netflix. Every time. On July 4th, Stranger Things, the season 3 came out on Netflix. And in 4 days, from July 4th to July 8th, over 40 million family units watched the show. Over 20 million in 4 days watched the entire thing. 824,000 accounts watched all 8 episodes, 1 hour each, on July 4th by themselves. Watched the entire thing. Dakota and I watched it in 2 days. Because the story is so gripping, and it gets you at the end, a cliffhanger at the end of every episode, and you're like, all right, I gotta watch another one. It's midnight, but I gotta watch another one. I gotta watch another one. And you don't stop. But then there are some that are horrible. Sue and I just rented a movie Friday night that was supposed to be a comedy. It wasn't. She was on her phone the entire time. And I was watching the Braves game on my iPad. It just didn't hook us, and I sat there and I thought, I can write something better than that. We all have done that. We all said, I can write something better than that. But writing a story is kind of hard. Even if it's your own story. About 4 years ago, I went through the process of writing our story of losing our son, AJ, when he was a baby. And the process was extremely difficult. You go through moments that would bring just tears to your eyes, or moments that you would smile, and the book, it gets done, and then the next step is sending it to the editor. And then all of a sudden you find out that you're not in control of your story as what you think you were. Because now the editor sends it back and says, okay, you need to take this out because this is a little redundant. Or you need to go deeper into this emotion. And I'm like, I don't want to go deeper. And the editor's like, yeah, you need to go deeper. And then the publisher gets involved. And then they're like, okay, your book has to be done at this time because this is the release date, and you have to get done. So eventually you find out, even though you're writing your story, you're not in charge of it. And a lot of us in our lives, we feel that we're in charge of our own story. We're in charge of the story of me. That is until we invite Jesus into our life. And Jesus doesn't want to be just a chapter. He wants to take over the thing. He wants to take over, and he wants to make it better. And in the year 2000, I began ministry, and I was a student pastor, and I preached a message, and I sat there and I went, I love this story so much that I'm going to preach out of this passage once a year. Once a year, I'm going to find, because it's so rich, you can find so much different material in it that I can do this every year. And since this is my first chance of speaking in 2019, I'm going to do it because I don't know when I'm on the schedule again. So hopefully I'm on there. Maybe this is a tryout. I don't know. But if you have your Bibles, turn to Mark chapter 5. Because we're going to look at the story of a man named Jairus. He had a storybook life. Just by context, we can infer that he was a respected man of the community because he was a ruler of the synagogue. And what a ruler of the synagogue was he was an official that was appointed by the elders of the community to look after the building of the synagogue, to look after the contents of it, and the arrangements of worship. He didn't teach. He didn't lead worship. He was just in charge of the building, everything in the building, and he was in charge of getting everything they need for worship. So he was kind of the president of the synagogue. He had a wife, and we know he had at least one daughter at about 12 years old. And so his story that he's writing, he feels it's pretty good. It's a good time. And then his story gets interrupted. His little girl gets sick. Now, a lot of times we can read this and we can just skim over, oh, the girl gets sick, she's going to die. But this morning, can we put ourselves in Jairus' shoes? Think about this through him, through his eyes. If you were blessed with a little girl or you were blessed with a child, think about them at 12 years old. They're getting sick. And there's nothing you can do about it. And they get worse and worse and worse and worse. And if it's anything like my family, when my boys get sick, they want nothing to do with dad. It's all about mom. And so as Jairus, his wife is comforting his daughter and trying to make her better, and doctors are coming in, they can't figure out what's wrong. He's sitting there going, I got to do something. I got to do something. This isn't how her life was supposed to go. This isn't how my life is supposed to go at this moment. She's sick. And maybe he hears that Jesus is coming on shore, and he's probably heard stories of Jesus. Because Jesus attracted a large crowd, and that was a headache for synagogue leaders. because large crowds was a big mess, and synagogue leaders had to manage that. So maybe he had heard about Jesus and about the crowds, and maybe he had heard about the miracles, or maybe he was even a part of a crowd, and he saw Jesus touch people and heal the sick and heal the blind and make the lame walk. Maybe he saw all that. And when he heard Jesus was coming on shore, he goes, you know what? This might be my last shot. My little girl is dying. So he runs to Jesus on the shoreline, and we're going to pick it up in chapter 5, verse 22. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little girl is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. What's interesting here is Jesus' response to Jairus verbally isn't recorded. It's just he went with him. He never recorded that he was going to touch his little girl and heal him. He just went with him. And so maybe now Jairus is starting to breathe a little bit easier, because this guy who has healed the sick is now walking towards my house. The journey of healing has begun, because this is his last shot. This is his last shot of his girl living. So he's probably writing chapter 13, My Journey with Jesus. And he's writing it down. He's writing it down. And then something happens that he was not expected. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, and she had suffered a great deal under many doctors, and she had spent all that she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd, because the crowd was gathering around Jesus, and it was a tight fix. And she touched his cloak, because she thought, if I touched his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she had been freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that the power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" And I love the disciples' response here. Really? Really? There's a crowd of people around you, and you're asking, "Who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Now Jairus' plan had been interrupted. He was going to go from point A to point B, the shoreline, to his daughter's bedroom. Jesus was going to touch her. She was going to wake up. She was going to be fine. The story is over. But Jesus sometimes, on our journey with him, will do something do things that we're not planned, that we haven't planned, that maybe it's not, okay, God, this is not how I wanted you to work. Jesus goes on a little tangent. He stops. He finds out who touches him. He's going off. Jairus is starting to get weirded out. How many of you, when you were in college or maybe in high school, you knew the professor and the topic that you could get them on that would waste the entire hour? Or that subject that your boss would get on that could waste an hour or 2 hours? Pastor Tony, we've never done that, I promise. I promise. But Jesus goes on a little tangent, so let's follow the tangent for a minute. Let's focus on this woman who was only known for her issue. She's not mentioned by name. She's only known for her issue. And a lot of us, we're only known for the issues that we have. She had been bleeding for 12 years, which means she had her period for 12 straight years. And what does that mean at this time? One, she could not go into the synagogue to worship. This is maybe where Jairus had met her. Jairus probably told her, "You can't come in here until you're clean." If she had a husband, she couldn't have relations with her husband. If she had a family, she could not touch her kids, or they would be unclean. If she had friends, she could not be around them. If someone was to touch her, They had to go take a bath and stay in their house the rest of the night because they were ceremonially unclean. And if she touched like a tree and somebody else leaned up against the tree, they had to do the exact same thing. So what's the big deal? She couldn't be touched. But here are some side effects for lack of physical touch. Aggressive behavior, body image issues, high stress, loneliness, depression, fear of attachment. And physical touch, it gives you this: inspires positive thinking and helps in trust, reduces social anxiety and stress, and it boosts your immune system, and it lowers the blood pressure. In Genesis, God said it's not good for man to be alone. And this lady had been alone for 12 years because touch has everything to do with relationships. And when she got healed, when she touched Jesus, just like it says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, we have a high priest that can be touched. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." In one moment, her life was restored. One action, one thing, her life was restored. But let's get inside of Jairus' mind for a minute. This was a great miracle. But this was a tangent in his mind. And especially if he knew her, which he might have because it was a small community. He sees who it is and it's like, oh no. And then she goes, year 1, year 2, year 3. This is what's happened. She tells him the whole truth, her entire story. And Jairus is like, Jesus, I can tell you the 411 on the way. Let's go. My daughter is dying. At any moment she can die, and you're stopping. Think about it, dads. This is your daughter on the line. Your daughter's about to die, and the one man that can help you is now stopped, and he's taken his time with this woman who's been alone for 12 years, and you've had to kick her out of your synagogue maybe several times. Your daughter is dying, and most of us get angry with God when he doesn't work the way we want him to work. In 17 days, there are students in here that are watching online or maybe not here today that you are dreading to go back to school. One, because maybe you think right now that you have no friends, and that moment you walk into that lunchroom and you're like, I am going to have to sit here by myself for a whole year. God, I've asked you to give me friends, and you're not doing anything for me. Or maybe the bills are piling up left and right, and you're like, God, I don't know how to pay these bills. Or fill in the blank with your issue at the moment. And you're like, God, why am I going through this? Why are you not working the way I want you to? But sometimes walking with God is not always about the destination. It is about the lessons that you learn along the way. Sometimes God has to close every door before you see him clearly. But we want to go point A, the shoreline, to point B, her bedroom, so Jesus, you can put your hands on her and heal her. That's what we want sometimes with God. But sometimes a lot of times God doesn't work that way. A lot of times, you know what? In Genesis, God could have said, Abraham, this is what I want you to do. In the morning, I want you to go outside of your house, build an altar, and I want you to sacrifice your son right there. But no, God knew the end of the story, but God still wanted to take Abraham on a 3-day journey so Abraham could learn how to trust God. Because every time he looked at Isaac, he was like, I cannot believe what I'm about to do in 3 days. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. But sometimes it's about the process. It's about what we learn along the way. And if God answered our prayers right away all the time, we wouldn't learn through the process. Could Jesus have healed that little girl on the shoreline? Absolutely. He could have said, okay, you want Jairus, you're good. She's fine. Could Jesus have stopped the woman with the issue mid-story and say, you know what? I know about your story. I know everything that's going on. But I have an appointment that I can't miss. If I'm late, I can't do a miracle. So I got to go. He could have done that, but he didn't. Why? Because her story mattered. He looked at her, he listened to everything she had to say, and she told him 12 years of misery. Because her story mattered, and she was at rock bottom, and guess what? That's probably exactly where he needed Jairus to be. Jairus needed to be at rock bottom so Jesus could work through him. Because now he hits it. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Now, his dream has been interrupted. He loved his little girl. In those days, some children were treated as commodities. But look at his actions. He ran to Jesus. He fell at his feet. He pleaded with Jesus to come to his home. If she was just a commodity, something he was going to marry off, he wouldn't have done that. He loved his little girl. He wanted to see her get married. He wanted to walk her down the aisle. He wanted to hold a grandchild from her. But his dream had been interrupted. And I think when they said right now, right here, your daughter is dead, he lost all hope. It's over at this point. And then they said something here very interesting. Why bother the teacher anymore? I think this was a shot at Jesus. Jairus, he's not who you thought he was. He's just a teacher. He's just an instructor. And then Jesus turns to the grief-stricken father and he says this, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, and these are the only recorded words that Jesus spoke to Jairus. Don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. I think Jairus is like, didn't you just hear the report? She's dead. There's no coming back from dead, Jesus. She's dead. But see, that's where faith starts. Faith starts at the end of human limitations. Because with Jairus, when he heard that his daughter's dead and he's probably starting to break down, get inside of his mind. He's starting to break down. You don't come back from that. And Jesus is like, this is just where I wanted to be. And then Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe. When you're at rock bottom in your life, Jesus is whispering to you right now, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. Do you trust me? Do you trust me to get you from point A to point B and further? Do you trust me? Because you're right where I want you now. You're right, that rock bottom, you're right there. You're right where I can work, and you're right where I can see, that you can see everything I'm going to do. He didn't let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When he came into the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing. And he went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him. And after he put them all out, this is a great phrase. After he put them all out, this is the same phrasing used in John chapter 2 when Jesus cleared out the temple. It says, sometimes with force. Can you imagine Jesus starting to throw people out left and right? That would have been awesome. Out the window. You're gone. Out the window. And Jairus is going, what are you doing? I paid some of these people to cry. You're throwing out all these people. But maybe Jesus had to clean out the house before he can do a miracle. Maybe there are some things in our lives that Jesus has got to forcefully throw out before he can work in our lives. So Jesus is cleaning out the house, and he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with them, and he went into where the child was. stop there. This is a nice story so far. This is good. But now let's get inside the parent's head. If you're a Jairus, this is the moment where you have walked in and now you have seen your 12-year-old little girl and she is dead. There's no coming back from dead. She's lifeless. Ladies, get inside the mom's head. Your little girl is dead. Can't go shopping anymore. You can't just have girl nights. You can't, she is gone. Now, hopelessness just fills the room. And it's not written down, but I can imagine Jairus falling at the bed of his little girl, weeping. Maybe his wife is either consoling him or she's down on the ground weeping as well. And this is just how I read Scripture sometimes. And I can imagine Jesus getting in between the two of them and going, don't be afraid. Just believe. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Do you trust me? When you're at rock bottom and you're at that bedside of death, don't be afraid. Just believe. Do you trust who I am? Do you trust in me? When things in the story aren't going the way that you want it to go, do you trust me? And he took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And then if I get back into Jairus' mind, as Jesus is saying that, I'm wondering if he goes, really? She's dead, Jesus. There's no coming back from this. Don't give me hope. She's dead. You're killing me. And immediately the girl stood up. Now death was interrupted. The whole storyline, all the interruptions, gets down to the final interruption of that death was interrupted. The reason why Jesus didn't answer him the way that he wanted to, because Jairus was just asking for a healing. He was just, go heal my Lord. But Jesus had something bigger in mind. Which is bigger, being healed or being raised from the dead? Maybe you're going through this problem. Maybe Jesus is going off on tangents in your life and he's not working the way you do because he has something bigger in mind for you. This isn't just a journey that Jairus finished a chapter and Jesus was done. This affected Jairus the rest of his life. His family was restored. His dreams were restored. His story had been restored. All because death was interrupted. Every time he saw his little girl play outside after that day, he thought about Jesus. Jesus made that happen. When his little girl walked down the aisle and gave her hand in marriage, he said, Jesus made that happen. When she handed him her first child, his grandchild, he's like, Jesus made that happen. Jesus didn't want just to be a chapter in Jairus' life. He wanted to take it over. He took it over. The worst day of my life was the day after our son AJ died. Wasn't the moment that he died when Sue and I were the only ones in the room. It was the day after. I couldn't get up out of bed. We had a 10 o'clock appointment to go make funeral arrangements, and I couldn't move. And I said, Sue, I can't go. So she went with her mom and my mom and our pastor's wife to make the funeral arrangements, and I couldn't move. And our house was about as big as this stage at the time, and family members were coming down from South Carolina and Pennsylvania. And we had church members coming to the house to be there for us, and my house was filling up, and I didn't care. I was laying in my bed. And then a knock on the door. And it was my dad. My dad was and still is, he's always been my hero. He said, son, there are people here. They want to see you. And I'm like, Dad, I don't care. I can't get up. He said, son, you got to get up. You got to move. I said, Dad, I can't. And then he said something to me that for the first time and the only time in my life, I hated my father. He said, son, you have to begin the healing process. And I turned around and I said, how? How am I supposed to come back from this? My little son is dead. My dream is gone. I won't be able to raise him, Dad. I won't be able to see him play baseball. I won't be able to see him. He's dead. How do I come back from this? And then my dad said something that is it's in my book, so profound it changed the rest of my life. He said, son, you start by moving one leg at a time. Your first step is to get out of that bed because God is not done with your story. He's not done. And so for the rest of my life, it's just 1 foot at a time. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at first. But for the rest of my life, it's one step at a time. Because on the other side of that pain, I got to spend 18 more anniversaries with the love of my life. I got to see Nevada being born and Dakota being born and Montana being born. And 17 more years of student ministry, seeing life change. Because I listened to Jesus on the other side of the pain. It says, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. And maybe this message isn't for everybody, but it's for somebody. It's for somebody right now that you are going through, you're at rock bottom. And what all you need to hear this morning is, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. And then everybody else that's having a good moment, you're going to get to rock bottom at some point. Or you're going to be at a point in your life where things aren't going exactly the way you want it to go. Jesus is not writing the story you want. Remember Mark chapter 5. Remember Mark chapter 5. Because the same author who is writing your story created this on the screen. Created the heavens and the earth. That is the picture of the Whirlpool galaxy. And in 2005, this thing that was 23 million light years away, the Hubble telescope took a picture of the middle of it. Take a look at the middle of it. Jesus is screaming from 23 million light years away, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. If the band will come back up. Because the same author who created that is writing your story, and he cares more about your story than the stars in the sky. So don't be afraid, just believe. Keep walking, keep walking. Keep your eyes on him. Even when he goes off on a tangent, keep walking. Because the sermon, the story of Jairus, the whole journey with Jesus with Jairus is symbolic of our story and our walk with Jesus. It's full of interruptions. It's full of things, Jesus not doing the things you want him to do. But Jesus is whispering the entire time, don't be afraid, just believe. So the one question I have for you before we sing the last song, will you continue to let God to write your story? Everybody just stand with me.